Welcoming Rory Gallagher in the out of control room now. Hi, Rory.
How you doing? Okay.
Very well. Can't complain at all. Nice to have you back in Toronto. When was the last time you were here?
About 6 years ago.
It has been that long, hasn't it?
Long gap, yeah.
So maybe you can fill us in on what's been up for you the last 6 years. You've got a new record out?
Yeah, well, we have a new album out in the last 2 weeks, Fresh Evidence, and we had another album called Defender, which will be released in a fortnight's time. That was out in Europe 2.5 years ago. So we were very busy in Europe, touring in places like Yugoslavia as well, and Hungary, but we spent a lot more time in the studios than we normally did before. But I can't, I don't know where the 6 years went. It just, because normally we would play Toronto and Canada and maybe once a year, once every year and a half, but the program just changed. But now we're back on the old routine again, so we'll be around more often.
I read something about your fear of flying.
Yeah.
How much of a part did that play?
It's quite a big part. We cancelled or postponed some dates in America and North America, Japan and Australia last year and the year before, because all of a sudden, after all these years, I had a couple of bad flights and they affected me. I got this Buddy Holly complex, and I could only fly like 1 hour or something like that. That would be maximum.
What would happen, if you don't mind me asking, what happens when you feel that way? Do you feel physically sick, or do you does it hurt you psychologically? How does that work?
Psychologically, I think it affects you. It's not so much fear of death; it's claustrophobia as well. But I mean,
and this was just a recent thing.
Well,
like
relatively recent.
You'd flown for a number of years. You've been touring for 20 years.
I've flown in my time, 2 or 3 flights a day, no problem, even with bad flights. But we had a couple of particularly bad flights around northern Norway, which is quite choppy. One was a helicopter, which didn't turn me on. But and then all of a sudden, I mean, the thing's getting blown out of proportion now. But it did affect. I certainly couldn't consider flying like we've just done from London to Tokyo this time last year. But I can do it now.
How did you get over it?
I don't know. Just I've worked through shorter flights. I've worked out kind of little mental things to do, little games little pictures, word pictures and things, and they get you through the flight. So, but it's like any phobia. You eventually roll over it and you feel great again. Then you start enjoying the speed of flight and so on. But
sure, yeah.
Well, plus you can also look forward to the quality food that most airlines serve too.
Yes, well, the high cuisine is
and quality films.
Yes, yes.
You might even see Conrad Bain up on the
screen.
screen.
Every Dudley Moore movie they ever made.
For people that might be unfamiliar with your history, Rory, maybe you can take us back a little bit. Your musical career goes right back to I guess the mid '60s or so. You really started things off back in Ireland.
Yeah.
What was we hear so much about the Irish music scene now, and it's been so acclaimed in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
What was the Irish music scene like in the mid '60s?
Well, you had traditional music was on one side. On the other side, you had show bands, which were kind of cabaret type dance bands playing in
with accordions and.
Well, they'd play pop music and a mixture of country and western. The more adventurous ones would do a little bit of, sort of rock and roll. The one I joined as a 14-year-old was as far out as a show band would get. They'd allow me to do 3 Chuck Berry numbers a night, maybe play Green Onions and
some Lonnie Donegan,
whatever, But it was frustrating in the end. I just got out as soon as I could. But I formed a group called Taste in '65 or '66, and the only one around. There were other beat groups, as they were called at the time, all playing in the sort of the Mersey beat fashion or copying American records. And then Van Morrison and them broke out with Baby Please Don't Go, and he was the first Irish guy to make it in England. And then they split up, and he went to live in America, as we know, and he didn't come back to Europe to play until '73. So we were the next people in line to follow through.
Yeah.
But it was very hard, really, to break in England, because they thought all the Irish acts were too schmaltzy, or that they would be like the Clancy Brothers or something like that. And eventually, via Hamburg and a couple of breaks in the Marquee Club in London, we got a record contract and played all over England and did a lot of festivals and played on very interesting bills along with John Mayall, Fleetwood Mac, Cream, Traffic, Free. In those days, some of the double bills would astound you. And that's how we started.
But certainly nothing like the Irish scene that we know today.
Oh, no.
What do you make of it now?
It's great. It's in Dublin now, for instance, being the capital city, it's obviously it's a hubbub of studios, all state-of-the-art places. You can do videos there, they make movies there. The session men all working there, and it's actually hip to go to Dublin now since the U2 explosion, and it's a so-called Irish sound now, and there's a kind of recognised style of Irish songwriting that's developed supposedly, and there's also an interest in groups like, you know, groups that blend folk, like Clannad folk with rock and so on, and Moving Hearts a while back played jazz, rock, Celtic, what have you. And I think the interesting thing about Ireland being outside the mainstream of the English pop scene, it can, at its best, it can be a bit more adventurous and not so top 20 minded, and it's also to a fair extent the people in Ireland are a little more broad minded about music. An ordinary kid would go to a folk thing tonight, he'd go to a rock thing tomorrow night, he might even go to a jazz thing the next night, whereas sometimes in England it can be very pigeonholed. You can have the heavy metal crowd who won't go to see a great folk actor, won't go to see, and vice versa, you know.
Yeah.
The stories from England in the early 60s, bands like the Animals, bands like the Rolling Stones, who had to send to Chicago to Chess Records for Howlin' Wolf Records and for Muddy Waters Records. What was your introduction to the blues in Ireland?
Well, my introduction was through a fellow called Lonnie Donegan, who used to do Leadbelly songs and Woody Guthrie songs. So in a second-hand way, that's where I first heard these American folk songs or folk blues. Other than that, you just hear occasionally Muddy Waters on a jazz program. You'd hear Chuck Berry, who was the borderline of blues and rock anyway, and Bo Diddley, Jimmy Reed. You'd hear AFN Radio and Radio Luxembourg were quite good stations, and they'd squeeze a fair bit of. But you know, you'd be just so hungry for guitar type music that, you know, I wasn't that purist at the start. I just listened to whatever I could. But in terms of buying records, it was very difficult. I think the first blues record in my hometown was like Sonny Terry and Brown and McGee, and then you'd get occasional EPs of Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. But bit by bit, I mean, obviously if you were in London, the record shops were better stocked, and once I got into London in the 60s, besides being able to get the records, and I'd see these groups at the Marquee, a lot of bands, contemporaries of ours, you know, that you'd hear songs from them and so on, and you'd speak to people who were interested in this music, and you just bit by bit build up your collection and read a few books and study it, you know.
How'd you learn to play the guitar?
I just taught myself. I just was fascinated by the instrument. I had a ukulele before that with a picture of Elvis Presley on it, which I kind of sort of tuned up, and then I got the acoustic guitar, and I had a book of Lonnie Donegan's hits, which all happened to be Leadbelly songs and Woody Guthrie songs, as I was saying, and they had chord boxes, you know, 6 lines down for the strings and frets across and dots, and I worked out the chords from that and learned the songs, which I knew anyway from hearing his records. And
So truly self-taught.
yeah, because there was only one guitar teacher in Cork where I came from, and he'd only teach classical guitar, so I was persona non grata.
So
Right.
does your chewing gum lose its flavor on your bedpost overnight part of your set these days?
No,
Not quite, eh?
It never was one of my. No. The problem with
Didn't think so.
Lonnie's only known for that, and my old man's a dustman, but people forget that he had a #1 hit in America with Rock Island Line, which is a Leadbelly song.
Well, he was like the leader of the skiffle movement,
Skiffle,
right?
yeah, which was very important. I mean,
That really influenced the Beatles,
the
correct?
Beatles and the Stones, I mean, they all started off strumming guitars to the skiffle thing, because it was relatively cheap to buy an acoustic guitar and get a guy with a T-chest bass and a washboard. It was kind of a bohemian kind of thing that went hand in hand with trad. Jazz was very popular in England as well before rock and roll really came in, and nearly all the rockers from that era will tell you that they started off skiffling. You know, it's cheap music, you know, and easy to learn, and
Right.
the next thing you attempt a Chuck Berry solo and you attempt a Buddy Holly solo and so on, and then you get into more bluesy stuff. But I mean, you've got to start somewhere.
Yeah. Did you almost join the Stones after Mick Taylor left?
No, I just went. I worked as a session man with them for 3 nights, but that was and then I had to go off to Japan and Australia.
One of those rock and roll rumors.
Yeah, well, a lot of guitar players were involved in those rumours, but it was Ronnie Wood was the obvious man for the job there. But it was good fun working with them. Bit late at night, they start sessions about 12 midnight roughly, and that's while they all wait for Keith to show up, and then they start riffing for 4 hours and something comes together. But they have a great way of building up a song from just very raw kind of roots.
The hours just weren't for you.
Oh no, that was no problem. But,
What makes up your set in 1991, Rory?
it's a mixture. It's confusing, particularly here at the moment now, because with such a gap, and with the last album before Fresh Evidence not released until 2 weeks' time, I don't know what to play. What I'm doing is a lot of Fresh Evidence, a lot of some of the older material that people want to hear, and a right blend. We don't have a song list every night. We just keep
Just go for it.
Go for it.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you in. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Rory.